God is moving. One particular dream is a little different. This is near the Caspian Sea, pretty dangerous area to share your faith. Our Jesus film team got lost. That was not good. They had their van parked there, and they were looking around trying to figure out where in the world they were. And out of the grove came this man screaming and waving his hands. Now, they thought they were in deep trouble. And as he got closer, he said, "You are the ones, you are the ones." And as he got even closer, he said, "You are the ones that I saw in my dream 2 nights ago. And in that dream, I was told by this man, Jesus, that you would tell me the truth. Will you tell me what is truth?" Once again, one could mistake that for a witnessing opportunity. Drove back to his village, led him and his whole family to Christ, and I'm sure many others in the village beside. Okay, so what have I just accounted for? I've just accounted for 3 of the most unreached sectors of the entire world. The only one I left out is Europe, okay? But India, China, Middle East, God is moving dramatically. But I'll give you one more fact, if you had any doubts whatsoever. Surveys are done by experts in the field of church planting, and they'll tell you how many churches are planted by the entire body of Christ in the course of a year. 10 years ago, that number of churches planted by the entire body of Christ would have been 100,000 new churches. Well, praise Jesus for that. In a recent year, the most recent year I've heard the accounting for, that number was 1.4 million new churches. God is moving today. And that isn't a testimony to technique or methodology, just there always are techniques, but it is a testimony to the fact that God has chosen this moment in time to find ways and people to get it done. So why do I believe that it's going to happen? Well, I kind of like to be on God's side, you see, and I think that's where he's headed. Let me give you some other reasons, though, regarding his people. The first thing I would tell you is they are praying. Now, I don't think I have to tell you that. You've seen plenty of evidence of that probably. You'll hear more about that in the rest of the week. But I want to read you a quote from a prayer expert. I wrote him specifically for the purpose of sharing this with you. Steve Hawthorne tells me, he says, "There's no question that united prayer for God's purposes to be fulfilled has been on the rise in astounding ways." Now, this is not a man prone to exaggeration, knowing him as I do. Astounding ways since the 1984 International Prayer Council gathering. So many different modes and ways of gathering. Concerts of prayer, computers to connect prayer, national prayer leadership, local prayer leadership in churches, prayer walking, prayer evangelism, spiritual warfare praying, pastors' prayer summits, 24/7 prayer rooms, global events with citywide gatherings on the same day, such as March for Jesus and now the Global Day of Prayer, hundreds of millions of people gathering on the same day. And all of these innovations and movements have unfolded since the 1984 gathering. So this is recent years. So it's not just the numbers. It's the substance and character of the vision of prayer that has matured and is still rapidly developing. Some of these things have historical precedent, but some of them have never been seen before. So I submit to you, with regarding God's people, they are praying. Second point I'd make about God's people, they are planning. They are planning. In Amsterdam 2000, is where Mark and I actually got to know each other pretty well. We were sitting at the same table in one of the discussion groups. It was part of a group of strategists. And in that group, we were challenged by Paul Eshelman and others to consider what more we could do to help fulfill the Great Commission. And Mark and I leaned and talked to each other and actually included the whole table eventually, said, why don't we just get it done? How is it that McDonald's can be everywhere? How is it that Coca-Cola can be everywhere? Why is it that we don't have the church everywhere? I look around this room and I can count up, I know the budgets of these organizations. There are billions of dollars being spent by the organizations represented in this room. It's a travesty that the Great Commission is not yet fulfilled. Let's just do it. Kind of a Nike mentality. Well, I want to tell you, there was a spirit around that table to just get it done. And we were looking for kind of a low-key name. We didn't want to really get a lot of publicity about this. What we call this group, that had committed themselves. We're just going to do everything we can to get it done with others, of course. And we looked at the number on our table, and it had 71 on it. So we said, well, let's just call it the Table 71 group. So that's how it got started back in the year 2000. So much has occurred, I don't have time to tell you just even out of that group, and you know what? God's working through other groups, many of whom I'm sure I don't even know. God is moving through people planning to get it done. I heard one time, some years back, there were 700 plans to help fulfill the Great Commission. I'm sure that number is much higher now. Korean missionary movement is seeking to send 100,000 missionaries, many of them to China. We have new terms that we didn't have 30, 40 years ago. Unreached people groups, unengaged unreached people groups, the 4K, omega zones, things that haven't existed in the past but are now needed as terminology in order to plan for the Great Commission. But the capper of them all, in my opinion, I had the privilege of being there when in Ethiopia, the entire body of Christ were represented by their leaders, a group of 600-700 people, I think, and they committed to a very, very specific, stepped out, strategically planned 100-year plan. Not just to reach Ethiopia, but to Christianize Ethiopia. I would say God's people are planning. They're planning. And the third thing I'd say about God's people is they are more at one now than they've been, at least in my lifetime. I want to give you what it used to be like. This is sort of a picture of it. Well, I watched this game when Taylor played their arch rivals, Indiana Wesleyan, and they were down 1-0, and they'd never beaten Indiana Wesleyan in their entire career. Taylor had never beaten the women's team. My daughter played sweeper, where those of you uninitiated with soccer, it's the rearmost person on the team except the keeper, the goalkeeper, okay? So sweeper is a defender. Well, 1 minute to go, they're down 1-0. Debbie used to play forward for my team, and she trapped the ball, and she looked up at the clock. They actually have a visible clock, saw the minute to go, and she said, what Taylor does not need is another defender. They need somebody up front. So she started dribbling. She got by the forwards on the other team, no problem. They're horrible at defense. And then she got by the midfield. That was a bigger problem. And finally, the defenders on the team got the picture. This woman might dribble through them and take a shot at goal, so they lined up. There were 3 of them across. There's no way she was going through them. And she looked over, and there was one of her players. It was kind of behind her and to the left. I remember I was watching this 30 seconds, 25 seconds. I'm watching this unfold. You know, I've been her coach for 10 years. I'm just cheering her on. This could be it. At least you'll tie the game. And so she pulls off one of the standard plays in soccer. It's called a wall pass. You pass the ball to somebody, you run straight at those defenders, and if she times it just right, she passes it behind those defenders. You emerge because they haven't turned around, and you're running, and you have the ball, and you have the shot, and you may well tie the game. Okay, that's the plan. It's clear. It's just as obvious to a soccer player as singing a hymn would be to us as Christians, okay? And so she passed it over there. She did her part. She ran straight at those defenders. And as she passed through those defenders, this person didn't pass the ball. And so Debbie's standing as the buzzer goes off, about 15 yards in front of the keeper, perfect spot to make your move and take your shot, and no ball. That is a picture of what the body of Christ used to be like. We wouldn't pass the ball. We'd hog it. I got the ball. These are my donors. I got the strategies. Come join me. You know, I could give you all the versions of what was said, and time doesn't even allow me to tell you specific stories, but take it as truth. 30 to 40 years ago, the body of Christ was not very at one with one another. Okay? That's the way it used to be. That's no longer the way it is. There's a strategy right now called the end-to-end strategy, which can go from Bible translation involving Wycliffe, the biggest Bible translating entity in the world. 80% of all translations in some way have to do with Wycliffe. Involving Campus Crusade relative to the Jesus film, involving Faith Comes by Hearing, involving church planting movements, many of whom are in touch with YWAM. And you look at all those organizations, and they have committed to this one thing. When it's our turn to do what we're supposed to do, like translate, dub a film, create a proclaimer, that's what Faith Comes by Hearing does with groups, we'll do our part exactly when we're supposed to do it, which so greatly accelerates. By passing the ball, we win the game.